Hello, my name is Kelly Tatum, and today we will be going over the lecture portion of the Comanche Art unit. A little bit of background, the Comanches were a nomadic band that lived across the American Great Plains, and by the 1800s they had a population of over 30,000 people, with 13 distinct groups. In 1865, they signed a treaty with the United States government to give them the lands of Oklahoma. However, this was not to last, and their lands were shrunk more and more with every passing year, and it is this forced westernization that caused this culture so much trauma, and it is trauma that you can still see today in their art. So on that happy note, we go to our first of our three major Comanche artists we will be going on today. So we have Joyce Lee, Doc Tate, Nevaquayah. He is kind of the pioneer of what we think of as modern Comanche art. In addition to being an artist, he was also a minister, a lecturer, a historian, a singer, a composer. One of his biggest claims to fame was his flute making skills and his ability to play the flute. But today we will be focusing on more of his 2D art, his works in oil, acrylic, watercolor, tempera, and prints. So we're going to start off with Sandstorm. This is an earlier piece of his, and you can see on Sandstorm there are two men on horseback. The background is relatively detailed, but not overly so. This is a trend that was quickly dropped in the Comanche art, somewhere around the 1980s. They stopped doing incredibly detailed backgrounds. Here's another one of his. You can see once again, this is a fairly realistic piece, and it takes place on Earth, and the colors aren't overly saturated. Or another one of his, still very much real. However, he does have a few pieces that do fit what we think of when we say Comanche art. So they're just lone figures or parts of lone figures on blank, otherwise sparse backgrounds. Or here are two more of his pieces that are part of a private collection. So moving on, we have Rance Hood, who is my personal favorite artist, and we'll get into why. So he is one of the few Native American artists left alive today who still paint in a manner that echoes traditional Indian culture and spirituality. However, this spirituality has been changed by the modern worlds. So he does paint and adhere to the mainly traditional styles of art practiced by his ancestors, and he is considered the most successful Plains Indians artist to date. So if we look, his paintings are presented in this mystical landscape that's not really of this world, and it's filled with what he denotes as heroic deeds and ancestral spirits. The majority of his paintings feature warriors on horseback that seem to be floating off the ground. His art just seems to flow with this energy and magic and life and just this freedom. He uses a strong composition of line. He has a strong composition and use of line, and just the most beautiful use of color. These are characteristics of Indian art, but Hood perfected it. And his themes of the mystical, spiritual, and and the religious practices that were passed down to him. And he states that his paintings are an extension of the theatrical adaptation of the original Plains painting. And it's just the extra life comes from his super saturated colors with just his deep blues and his just crimson reds and his stark whites. So moving on, we have Saupitty, the most recent of these artists. he came at the tail end of the 1980s art movement. So Tim Saupitty, what he does is he focuses on recreating other Comanche works that would otherwise be lost. He is most commonly commissioned by the Comanche Nation Museum. And so his works are mostly watercolor. He did state in a 2010 interview that is his favorite medium. And he tends to use much darker colors than the other artists, but his colors are still not any less brilliant. They're just darker and little toned down. So what he is known for is his works depicting the warrior and mystical elements of the Southern Plains Indian culture. A big thing about Tim Saupitty is he does work for commission, so the majority of his works are privately owned. And that does make me a little upset, but that we can't see them, but it's not my place to say. So moving on, we are actually similar to Tim Saupitty. We will also be recreating a Southern Plains piece, or could also be Northern, Comanche Nation piece. So I chose Rance Hood's 1972 1972 piece, Comanche Chief. And so on the next video, you can see, on the next video, I will be doing a live demonstration. Thank you.
Hello, this is the follow-up video to the Comanche Art lecture. Today we'll be doing a live demonstration and I'll be walking you through my process. For this, I am recreating Rance Hood's 1972 piece, Comanche Chief. He painted it on tempera with a piece of wood, but you can use whatever supplies you have at home, whether that be pencils, markers, crayons, pens. Don't feel the need to go out or buy anything, just see what you have already. I'm using acrylic paint on brown butcher paper. So my layout is I have my painting on one side, and on a second piece of butcher paper, I've laid out my palette. I will be staying true to Rance Hood's original piece, relatively, so that means I'm just going to mainly be using primary colors and browns. So I just kind of started by putting color on the paper, and I'm just trying to block out where I think everything should go and just get the proper shape of the headdress, starting out with a red and ending with the blue. I decided to use my brightest reds and blues. I'm just trying to copy Hood, and I really want my colors to turn out as bright as his because it's his color that originally drew me to his works and the reason why I chose to copy him. I just think it's amazing what he can do with so few colors. So the next thing what I did was that I got the white part of the headdress painted in the front part of it, and then I mixed my browns to get our gentleman's face in. I really didn't like how his original skin tone is a bit too close to the butcher paper and it doesn't stand out on camera very well. So I decided to use black so that way everything can pop and it'll help me reshape my feathers. And because they weren't very accurate on the first try. And this also helps me outline his face better. It helps me reshape everything, and it really, really helps my colors pop. And so going in, I'm just finishing up my black outline, and I'm covering up those little tan bits that I added on the front part of the headdress because I really didn't like those. And now I'm just cleaning up the back part of the headpiece. So what I'm doing next is I'm taking my brown and I'm going in and I'm adding the face. So I decided at this point that I really didn't want to do something hyper detailed. I decided I wanted it to be kind of sketchy, a little rough, because I felt like that suited me a lot more. But you can do yours however you want. You can make yours as detailed or as lack of detailed as you like. This is your work, not mine. And so for the next part is I'm going in and I'm adding some of the reds and the greens to the headpiece. And just trying to get those little colors in there. And now the next thing I'm doing is I'm making the original headpiece. It had dried a little darker than I thought it would. So I'm just really trying to get it red. I'm trying to make it look fluffy and soft. And the next part is the headpiece with the gray feathers. I'm just filling in the gaps because with reshaping them, it turns out I had left some gaps. And the next part is I'm adding the white dots to the end of each feathers. This turned out to be a little harder than it looked because my white got progressively less white every time I used it. So for the next part, I'm redoing the kind of the furry feathers on the back, and I'm mixing a new blue because I didn't like the shade of the original blue. I thought it was too dark, and this lighter blue was also a little bit closer to the original, and it just stands out beautifully against the black background. So for the next part is I'm adding polka dots to the headpiece. I decided just to freeform it. I wasn't using the piece as reference. So for the next part is I'm mixing in a nice brown color that I like for the body of the chief, and then using black to fill it in. And lastly, I'm mixing in some brown to get his shoulder in there, and then I'm going to finish it off with a paint marker just to get our final features in there. And then we'll be almost done.